Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Castle of Horror interview segment where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the steampunk graphic novel Clockworks, with Tony Salvaggio out this month from Humanoids. All right, tonight, Kevin Killiany has written science fiction novels, ebooks, short stories for TV shows like Star Trek and Doctor Who, and role-playing games like Battletech, Shadowrun, MechWarrior, and basically all manner of compound proper nouns that you can think of, and also for the Valiant universe. His new book, Down to Dirt, is YA science fiction set in an alternate world where three young women vie alternately to remain on the Earth or go to space, and one is determined to take on the elitist space service and break its stranglehold on the stars. That's original IP. Welcome, Kevin, and I'm going to ask you about that.
Okay, great. Ask me about which part, because you covered so many bases coming in.
I covered the whole thing. We're the last one, Down to Dirt. I'm gonna ask you about, because I know it's your own thing. But before we get to that, okay, I know you wanted to talk about a book that you've been involved in getting back out there again. That was an influence on you, but it's not your book. It was a book by apparently your uncle called A God Against the Gods, and it's in the new story bundle. Can you explain, like, what's that all about? Why are you involved in the release of that book?
Well, basically, my uncle, Alan Drury, mostly is known for his political novels and, of course, Washington, D.C., but he was always fascinated by human culture and human powers, and he fell in love with the story of Akhenaten and his attempt to replace the pantheon of Egypt with his own monotheistic faith, belief
right.
in the sun. Yeah. So this was, and this isn't he found this fascinating. He spent years studying it, and unfortunately, recent studies have found that a lot of the things that they knew as a fact in the 70s when he was writing it weren't really facts. So
you should see what we used to think about dinosaurs. But go ahead, continue.
Right. Oh, and I remember, and are you old enough to remember when Venus was supposed to be a jungle planet because of all those clouds?
I may have seen some of that in Outer Limits or something like that. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, things change as we learn more. But this story, what Akhenaten did was absolutely amazing, because it was really the first, and he was a god. The pharaoh was a god within the pantheon, and he was declaring, no, there's this one god. So he was simultaneously stripping himself of power and trying to overthrow the power of all of the pantheon.
Sure.
And it was, Al kind of wrestled with how to do this story, because it was very complex and happening at very many levels. And now my Uncle Alan was a very private man. He talked about his work never at all. You get on an interview with him or something, he'd be very much, well, yes, it's my craft. This is what I do. And
he talked about famous books. I mean, Advise and Consent, if I recall, which was one of his novels, that became a movie, didn't it? I could swear that there was an Advise and Consent film.
There was a movie. There was a stage play. Yeah. Movie, stage play. He got the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So yeah, he was in what I got a kick out of when I was reading Stephen King's On Writing. And golly, if I had my copy here, I have I said, looking around the room, I don't have it with me. I dog-eared the page. He refers to my uncle, Alan Drury, as a heavy hitter. So Stephen King called Uncle Al a heavy hitter. Okay, so that's we need to put that on the cover of all the books. But anyway, what happened is, at that time, when he was writing this, which was in the early, was actually 75, I was really trying to become a writer, and it was my first time I decided I was going to be a writer, and failed miserably at it, and went out and did a bunch of other jobs before I finally came back to being a writer. But I asked him a question about how to present something, and the one and only time he talked to me about the craft of writing is he talked to me that in A God Against the Gods, he realized that the tapestry was so complex that he could not, in a regular third-person, omniscient view, tell a story, and have it be as compelling as it should be. So what he did is told the story in multiple first person. It's the accounts of a slave, of a priest, member of the royal household. Each person tells their own individual take on the events, on what happened. So that what you have is a kind of a tapestry, but more like a quilt, because it's got all of the little pieces all put together, and you see them all. You see the entire.
Yeah.
No one in the story sees the whole story. You see the whole story from the little pieces from each person along the way and how the story unfolded. And so he told me about how
other books went. Is that how like Advising Kids went?
Uncle Al did not like the first person very much at all. He did do a Anna Hastings, his one about the newspaper empire. He had told to the first person of one of the characters who saw the whole story because he was there. But he did not. He was not comfortable in first person, and he preferred the third person and having enough room to explain what is going on. For him, he thought the third person was closer. You could involve the reader more, because you could show them and tell them things that the person, the actual character in the story, would not know. So he thought that was more useful. So the first person was not something he liked or was comfortable doing. The multiple first-person accounts, multiple eyewitness accounts. This is the first time in this book, God Against the Gods, and then the sequel, which deals with the aftermath of this theological revolution, Return to Thebes. These are the only books he did this way, and he only did them this way because the story demanded it. There was no, he really couldn't.
Big.
Huh?
Yeah, because it's very big. Yeah. It was a very, very,
yeah.
It's a very sweet story.
And very, very complex, yeah, and that's what he did. And that's the only time he did it, and that was the only time he talked to me about writing. And so this one, there's a lot of his, well, I was about to itemize everything I liked about all his books, but let me not go there. Anyway, but
because we're going to get to yours.
Oh, yes, right. Oh, I'd forgotten, yes. Yeah, but no, I feel a very, very personal connection to the Egypt novels written by Alan Drury.
Oh, that's beautiful. So, yeah, and it had come up, you and I had gotten connected because the story bundle right now that's going on and has about a week left in it or less includes Alan Drury's God Against the Gods. So it's the Egyptian revolution story, basically. And then one of my fantasies is in it, Spawn of Loki. So we got hooked up, and it gave me the chance to ask you about your new book, which is called Down to Dirt. But before I ask you about this, so you've done a lot of work like in franchise universes, right? Where somebody hires you to write a book or a story about something that already exists.
Right, yeah.
Some of the ones I mentioned, like Shadowrun or BattleTech or Star
yeah.
Trek. So
yeah, Star Trek, Doctor Who, yeah.
What are the unique challenges of, like, if somebody says, hey, I want a Star Trek novel, what are sort of the unique challenges that you have there that you don't have with your own stuff?
Well, you're never going to be able to sell a Star Trek novel because the industry does not work that way. What happens is you establish yourself as somebody. You become a blip on the radar. And then when there's a need for new novels coming out, the editors overseeing the particular run of novels or whatever will let it be known and invite pitches, a high concept pitch,
right,
of what it is you would do. If they like the pitch, they will ask for a treatment. And you do a treatment.
Is that like a long outline? Or?
Yeah, it can be. Actually, it could be just about anything. A very good friend of mine, Ilse Bick, usually writes a treatment that's almost as long as one of my novels. So she's very detailed in how she does it. And I tend to send a telegram, and if they like it, I get, could you be a little more complete on exactly how it is you're going to get from point A to point B?
Right.
And so I will. The way I write, the way I envision a story, I usually see like series of mountaintops rising out of the mist, So I have an idea of what the main things are going to be, but I'm not really always sure what's in that mist between those two mountaintops.
Right.
So I try to make it sound like I'm an expert anyway when I make the pitch. And if they like that, you get a conversation, a contract, and once you have the contract, you then have a deadline to turn in the novel. So my original, a lot of times I was pitching for, specifically for the MechWarrior universe, because I happen to have sold some BattleTech short stories, and I really wanted at that time, the company that had the novel license was WizKids, who were eaten by Tops. But anyway, they were doing novels, and I kept pitching novel ideas. I just throwing them in the room. Here, take this. And nobody paid any attention to it. So that was very heartening, yeah. But I also was connected with the game BattleTech, which is a sister game, and I was at one point held out with a unit, a book about the different combat units. Okay, so I did a couple of unit descriptions, and then there was a situation where the guy who was supposed to do some stuff didn't do it, and they called me and said, "Hey, can you do this?" And I was like, "Sure," and turned around and did it. I surprised myself, actually. Did it very quickly, and started getting a reputation for doing things in a pinch. And then then out of the blue, I was told I could pitch for. I was actually invited to pitch for a MechWarrior thing, and I was like, "Great! They like how I write. They just didn't like any of those ideas." Okay, so now I've got it. And it turns out they didn't know I'd been pitching the stories. No one ever noticed or made the connection.
Right.
What had happened is, as sometimes happens in the franchise universe, writing industry, a writer could not deliver.
Yeah.
And they suddenly had a hole in their lineup, and what the editor there did is reached out to other editors in the industry and said, "Do you know somebody who can work real quick?" And the people I'd been doing these little articles and things for said, "Yeah, here's this guy. Give him a try."
That's
so
cool.
Yeah, it turned out that I had established a reputation for doing little things around the corner, and I ended up getting novels with the writing novels for MechWarrior. And unfortunately, WizKids got bought by Tops, and Tops didn't really like the novels, so I kind of got my foot in the door of an empty office. But that happens in the industry. It's if you're standing in the right spot. But to be standing in the right spot, you have to keep doing little things, and don't go in like you think you're going to be the next big thing, because you're not.
Right. Unless suddenly you are. But I mean, I like your advice of just continuing to do useful little things, and a lot of the writers that I admire the most are doing books when they've got books on order. They're doing their own books when they don't have somebody asking for a book, and they're doing short fiction in between. They're just sort of constantly churning out stuff. So speaking of, go ahead. Please. No,
I was going to say that one of the things that really matters the most, if you're going to do really what's essentially write for hire, you have to not be married to the idea of being famous. I would say somewhere between a third and half of my words that have been published don't have my name anywhere where anyone in the public would know it was there.
Really?
Because
really?
I got a reputation as a book rescuer. So or I do articles, or I'd be part of a team of people, and the name on the cover, and then it would have other writers listed inside, and I'd be in there.
Yeah.
I
did
also did a
for X-Men. I did one with Tom. It was Tom DeFalco and Jason Henderson, right? Where Tom's a really great writer. I mean, no disrespect at all, but he contributed an outline, and I contributed a book, and that's and that's how it works.
There you go. Yeah, see, and you have to not worry about that. I did a lot of web content for a couple of other game contests. There's only one of my websites I ever did still up, so I'm not going to direct everyone there. I want them to keep listening to us.
Right.
But you have to also be thinking. I say the difference between being a writer in this universe and being a totally original fiction writer is the difference between being a soloist and being, first chair in the violin section. You have to do, in both situations, the best you can do, bring your A game no matter what. But in one time you're on your own, in the other situation you are part of a team, and your stuff not only has to be good, it has to fit flawlessly with everyone else. So that's actually kind of a challenge I enjoy sometimes. There's a lot of making that happen. But the writers the writers who write tend to a lot who get involved in things like the industry approach what we do as a craft, not as I am an artist, with your little beret and everything. Or actually, no, it would be tweed jacket with leather elbows for us. But yeah,
tweed jacket never goes away. The beret, I think, went away sometime with Maynard G. Krebs, honestly. But I think
you're right. You're right.
I'm down with the jacket and the elbow pads. So.
Right. So if you envision yourself as an artist creating art, you will probably do really nice stuff, really great stuff. You can do fantastic stuff, but you won't do a lot of it in a lot of different places. Does that make sense? You approach it as a craft. Yeah. So I'm a craftsman.
No, I know exactly what you mean. The people I know who do a lot of work for hire, they do a lot of work for hire. You're either doing almost none because you're doing like a novel a year and that's your whole spiel, or they're doing a lot of work for hire, and it's interesting to see people do both. But let me ask you about Down to Dirt. So this is the new. It's a young adult science fiction novel. This is your own world. So now you're dealing with the challenge of creating a world and trying to figure out I talk to me about what the challenges are where you have to get somebody's attention and have them go, oh, well, I've never heard of this. This isn't Star Trek. This isn't, BattleTech, but it's interesting. So, I'm going to read it anyway. Well, how do you grapple with those challenges?
Well, I get a spot on your show, and then everyone hears about it, and they all go buy it. So that's really my whole strategy.
That would be my hope. Yes.
Really, what is happening, since this is the first novel in a series, and it is just starting to get a little bit of traction because people are starting to talk about it here and there. So that's great. What I did, this universe, can I talk about for a moment about how I wrote the book or how I came to write it, if that'd be okay?
Anything you like. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Central Florida in the 50s and the 60s. My father was an engineer with a company that was contracted to the space program. And, in 1960, we were all absolutely certain that by the year 2000, there would be colonies on the moon and, cities in space and all of this going on, because we were kind of living in a bubble there in the space program. We just figured we are the vanguard. And at that time, I fell very much in love with Golden Age science fiction and really loved it growing up. And I would read it at those days. YA was called juvenile, so I would read, Robert Heinlein's juvenile novels like Have Spacesuit Will Travel or Star Beast and Podkane of Mars. And so I read these, I devoured them, I loved them. Went on. As an adult, I went back to them because I was really trying to figure out what I was doing as a writer and writing. And I came back to them and realized something I had never noticed growing up, and that was that the only people who seemed to make it into space were white Americans.
Interesting.
And, but it was not that anyone deliberately did that. It was that the mindset in the 40s and the 50s when they were writing, it could be an amazing vision of the future, but it wasn't very diverse. And at this time, and just to add some perspective, at this time, I am half of a racially blended family. I have so the idea that including black people in the book seemed like a very good thing to me, since I was pretty much including them in my life. So, and I said, okay, so but I love this fiction. So what would happen? How would the world have to be different that this happened? that this is actually what happened. And then the rest of the world and the civil rights movement and everything started happening, and it became a conflict between the elite white folks in space and all of the folks on Earth, and it just that oversimplifies it.
Yes.
But what I did is I went back.
I mean, not that it oversimplifies, but I get what, and this is actually an idea that we've seen before in science fiction a little bit, where the elites go into space, and everybody else gets this. Hell, that's what happened in Blade Runner, actually.
Right.
And also the book, and it's kind of what's happening in Metropolis as well, is the elites are going into the sky anyway. They're going into skyscrapers. Right. And everybody else is remaining on the Earth. But continue. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, what I did now, and I love that kind of story.
Yeah.
Which, not a surprise, I guess. What I wanted to do was make it, instead of saying, well, there was a revolution and this happened, or this scientific breakthrough suddenly gave them this advantage, or all the dogs and cats died, or, something, that I wanted to make it, how would history have to go? So what I started doing is researching my history, and actually, everything goes about the same in my alternate world until FDR decides not to run for a third term. And then we have, and then when the war breaks out, we don't have the nuclear weapons because FDR was a big fan of that. And anyway, the country pretty much nationalized a lot of stuff to become a real conventional warfare fighting machine. We had a ground war in Japan and all of this other stuff. So we ended up being the dominant culture, but we also ended up, because we did it conventionally, with our people everywhere. Our soldiers were,
sure.
After the, so there was a plausibility to how we got there. Then I set up a conflict within, because I had Sam Rayburn become president. He was pretty liberal for a Democrat back then, and he integrated the military just so they would have enough people to do this. The society was still in segregation. He integrated the military so that we'd have enough people to throw at the other guy's bullets. And so then there became a tension between this integration getting into the rest of the culture. Well, the next president after Rayburn was Strom Thurmond, and he was
Oh, my God. So this is a kind of a scary alternate reality if Strom Thurmond is becoming president of the United States.
Yeah. So he gave so the government got exceptional powers to protect against threats to our divine nature and everything. And so we then had a very oppressive apartheid-type government that was pretty much nationalized because that part the government liked. So they had
this is all in the
control
background of Down to Dirt, though. In other words, this all of this stuff is literally in the is literally just the history that the characters are carrying around with them.
Right, and it gets discussed occasionally, but this is the foundation. And what's happened now is the story is told, and I did this, and this was tie back just a quick second to The God Against the Gods and Return to Thebes. When I was mapping all of this out, and I covered the whole world, not just the U.S. I had Joe and I died in Paris, and I did all these other things, and I realized I had in my head that I was going to do one of these huge Harry Turtledove, giant mega novels in a row detailing what happened when the aliens landed or whatever, so that the history changed.
No, I'm down with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it didn't work. Absolutely did not work. Every time I tried to make it work, it was like I would get bored with it. I'm like, okay, so this isn't really the story. And what happened is quite by accident, and the way I describe it is this really arrogant, entitled teenager started complaining to me about her parents sending her down to dirt. I mean, obviously, I'm not psychotic. I know it was not really a teenager in my head. But as a writer, sometimes this narrative voice will sort of, it's part of your brain that's doing the creative stuff, has an idea that your rational mind isn't paying attention to.
So what does down to dirt mean again? What is it?
Down to dirt. Well, dirt is what the people who live in space call Earth. They call it dirt, small d.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, it's like saying trash, or like saying it's. In other words, it's a really sort of derogatory term.
It is the place where all the people who are not fit to live in space and be part of humanity's future are kept.
Yeah.
So it is. It's the refuge. It's the birthplace and refuge. Trash pile of humanity. So, but there are a lot of people who work in space who are actually, they got the job. They were on Earth and they got the job. They qualified to get up because it really takes a lot of people, and they couldn't just keep going. So it's people get into space only. They were still racist, so you only had one ethnic group getting into space.
Yeah. But
a lot of them still had connections with their families on Earth and stuff, and where most of them would sort of, okay, great, I've made it, I'm out, let's go. A lot of them would come up and do, say, their 20-year tour and earn tremendous amounts of money and go back down to dirt so they could live, there on Earth. My first character, the annoying teenager who is talking to me, is named Mara Duvall. And Mara is about to go, she's in training to go on the Jupiter mission, which will be about a 20-year mission to Jupiter. It's going to go out there and establish a colony. And if she comes back, it's going to be, it'll be longer than she's lived already before she gets home. And her parents, who are both people who were born on Earth and are working in space, determine that she should go and see her family, the people that they're leaving behind, so that she can have some idea, because, of course, she's this little elitist person who's lived in space her whole life. They want her to have some context for what she's doing.
Yeah.
So they get this through the authorities, and there's this whole arrangement where the timing on it is very odd, which she doesn't figure out. Later on in the story, she figures out that her parents were doing some very serious planning ahead, but I don't want to spoil everything. Anyway, so she has to go down to dirt, and she goes down to dirt, just really takes a while to talk her out of her spacesuit when she's down here, because she's like just that terrified of the environment, because, diseases and all this other stuff. And
sure.
And her...
But the cool thing is that's actually, that whole concept is something that, you can take at face value, but you can also recognize it as being very like situations that you might invent in everyday life. You could see somebody who, for whatever reason, because of their job, has to go to some neighborhood where they feel like they don't belong and they feel like is not their station in life, and where they're not going to be willing to stop carrying their pepper spray all the time. And, there's a certain level of paranoia. So that makes sense. I mean, and that, in a sense, that's part of what science fiction has been doing. Certain kinds of science fiction, at least as long as I remember, where you take social questions and you turn them into science fiction metaphors. Let me ask you really quickly about your process. So when you're writing a book like this, do you outline everything out, or do you just like fly by the seat of your pants and try to get it done? How do you work?
Both. I actually do, when I'm first mapping out a story, I've used the metaphor earlier, which of the mountaintops showing up through the mist. I have basic idea. I know anchor points where things are going to happen in this story. I'm not really sure how I'm getting from one to the other. And as I go along, I sometimes get to like Mountain 4, and I realize that there was a better way for me to have gotten from 1 to 2, and I'll go back and I'll change that so it will set up things that are going to happen after Mountain 4, if that makes sense. What I usually work with is a storyboard. I have my little major scenes that I'm going to have, and I sort of organize them, and I used to, well, at one point I was using cards and putting them out on the floor, and then that got really useless. So I usually use graph paper and circles and arrows and things. And these graph paper, there'll be one that just has like 6 pictures. That's the whole novel. And then there'll be one that has, 20 of them, and that's actually a scene, how it mapped out, because I have to visualize what I'm doing. I don't tend to write narrative outlines, which is one of the reasons I had a lot of trouble pitching stories, because we had 90,000 words novel, and I'd send them in a 800-word description, and they're like, wait a minute.
Well, no,
What's
to
happening?
be honest with you, that makes sense to me. Because you can either blow it out or you can tell it in a couple of paragraphs. I have a feeling that if somebody asked me for an outline, I would come up with just a couple of paragraphs as well, and it's like,
right. And
you got to trust me. The rest of it is going to look like a book. Okay,
it'll be huge.
It'll be a book.
But yeah, it'll be a book. Yeah, no, they a lot of times people who want to pay you money to write for, would like some reassurance that you actually have some idea how you're going to do it. So
right.
I actually had, so I had to learn how to do a narrative outline. I don't think in a narrative outline. I'm a visual kind of person, so I don't outline things so much as I make a map, and which literally will be just notebook paper or graph paper. I use up a lot of graph paper, mapping out my story. I spend a lot of time writing when I'm not in front of the keyboard, so I'll do things like mow the hostas or drive my kids to elementary school they haven't been at in 10 years or, whatever, because I'm thinking of my I'll end up places going, why am I here? I was because I was writing my book in my head while I was doing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
My family is very used to me suddenly blurting out bits of dialogue that have nothing to do with the world around me. I'm just all of a sudden, that's something, So
that's something that my wife has been complaining about, I think, for something like 25 years, is that half of your brain might be engaged in whatever it is that you're doing, and a good portion of it might at the same time completely be, sort of locked in some narrative thing that you're trying to solve or some bit of dialogue that you're trying to remember, and that's just the reality. That's what it is to live with somebody who does this. For a living or for a vacation. So,
Oh, my whole family is used to me being suddenly startled by someone I've actually been talking to, and then realizing, wait, they're there. Yeah.
So how many? So I get what you're saying as far as how you organize, but how much do you try to get done every day? Do you certain number of pages, certain number of words?
I usually think in terms of words. If I want to get the scenes done, I usually think in terms of I need to do this scene, and so this scene will be today's objective.
Right.
And I'll work on that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
I don't have so it comes out. Some days I'll have, I'll spend 6 hours and have written several thousand words and finally end the day with 800 good words I like, and that's a really good day, So I'm fine because I got the thing I wanted to do that day. So then the next day will be my next idea, and they don't happen in order, because as you envision your story, anytime you envision the story, there are parts of it that are very vivid to you, and there are other parts you're not quite sure of, and what really helps is to write the parts that are vivid. Now, don't get through all the dull stuff to that vivid spot. Do the vivid things, and the way they go will give you something to work with, your subconscious something to work with that will suggest ways to get things connected through the dull pages. Yeah.
Wow, that's fabulous. That's it's funny. You're the second person I've talked to who had that notion that you should just go ahead and skip to the scene that you know how it works, and then figure out what connective tissue needs to come in between. And by the way, sometimes it's a lot less connective tissue than you think to get there. If you go, I used to find when I was doing high fantasies, the book that I have in the story bundle this month is high fantasy, where there's battle scenes and stuff like that. And I used to find that when I'm working up to a battle scene, I would start putting it off like in the first draft, I'd start like going, well, these guys got to go over there and get some machinery, and these guys got to go over there and like forge some tools, and let's have a meeting over here about the upcoming battle. And it's like, what the fuck are you doing? You're just like putting off the battle, basically. You're
right.
you're trying to avoid writing this battle scene. And sometimes you just got to go, I'm writing the battle scene. We're just going straight to it, and then we're going to figure out like what else is left that I left behind, and or what of that stuff that we did needs to be cut because for some reason I was just sort of dithering on the way to this.
Yeah, false trail. I went on a false. Whoops, went the wrong way. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Look.
And sometimes it's false, and sometimes it's just you're just layering too much. These two sides to this battle need to do all this preparation, and sometimes you can get lost in like how much of this is actually really interesting and edifying and helpful to understanding, and how much of it is just sort of extraneous stuff that kind of proves that you've done your homework and you've thought about how complicated all of this is,
right.
but it's not actually necessary. But boy, well, all right. Oh, and finally, what I always ask everybody is, where do you do your writing? Do you, library, Starbucks, church basement? Where do you go?
Okay. Usually, I used to be a coffee shop camper, and I would have I'm easily distracted, and so I would have my headphones on, got the big can headphones so it blocks out the sound around me, and playing, I need music with voices in it because if you're just playing regular instrumental music, the other voices come in. So I would have these headphones on, they'd be playing music, but it wouldn't be anything that could distract me, so I'd have like, Francophone Afropop on or something like that. Language I don't understand, music I won't stop writing and start bopping to. And my baseball cap pulled down over my eyes so that I could just see my screen in front of me, and I hear and I can focus on what I'm doing. So I was that really odd guy in the corner for a while. I've actually discovered that I write very well usually any place that's kind of nice and quiet. I don't need I used to have rituals. And I've discovered that I really don't need a ritual. I need an electrical outlet for my computer, but other than that, if I've got a quiet place where I can work there. I do like libraries a lot because sometimes I can sit there and say, this is never going to work, and then I look around at all these other things that got published. I'm like, okay, yeah, they did it. They did it. So, I like libraries. Right now, I have a sort of home office thing that's up toward the attic of the house. Unfortunately, it's very hot, so I do most of my writing in the summertime in the dining room because there's a nice big table there, and it's not burning hot like it is up in the attic, and I can work there. So that's where I am usually.
So you've jettisoned the ritual of getting in the car and driving to the coffee shop and said, I can do it here. I don't need.
Right, because it was really when you're spending a half hour getting your ritual done before you start writing, you've lost a half hour of writing, and it took me years to get there. Okay, I didn't just decide, what, the heck with this ritual. No, it's just actually occasionally it was painful to let go of them, but I realized I was more productive if I didn't follow rituals. So.
That's really, really interesting. One thing about doing this show is I've talked to so many writers, and so many people have they have different attitudes about this. Some are extremely ritualistic, and I have to have this and I have to have that, and their creature surroundings need to be properly attuned. And I'm not mocking that in the slightest because I got some of that myself, And some are like, I don't care. Stephen King style, I'll just write on, as long as I have a folding chair, I can write on an ironing board. It just really depends. And I love it, though, because my goal is that people will be listening to this and going, what kind of writer do I want to be? How do I want to conduct myself? And they'll hear that there are all these different possibilities. And they can, to paraphrase Bill W., you can take what you like and leave the rest, and
right.
Off a lot of advice here. Wow. Well, Gosh, okay, so we've talked about your stuff. We've even talked about your uncle's stuff, and I really appreciate it. The new book is Down to Dirt from Kevin Killiany. You've done a lot of neat stuff, and I've really enjoyed, especially hearing from you, some of the realities of franchise fiction as well. So that is very cool, and I very much appreciate it. All right, everybody, look for Down to Dirt. Look for the story bundle to find A God Against the Gods and my own Spawn of Loki, which is just for like another week or less, actually, now, where you get a whole bunch of ebooks together. And have a fantastic evening. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll talk to you soon.
Well, thank you for having me, Jason.
Absolutely. Bye.
All right. Bye.